Hello, very beautiful community. Let's do something granular now that's really important, actually, about how we challenge Trump's lies as something that I am not and you are not, which is as journalistic institutions. There's an enormous amount of confusion about this, and there's a complete private epistemic meltdown by professional journalists about how to deal with people who either lie 77 times a week or do post-truth. They destabilize the very difference between lies and truth. Journalists know how to deal with politicians who throw in a couple of lies a week. They don't know how to deal with torrential lying or the destabilization of the relationship between lies and truth. So let's have a look at a little example which illustrates how journalistic institutions are facing this challenge, and then we'll produce what I think is an example of how institutions can go around not solving this, but at least adopting an approach to it that's proactive, which currently, I'm afraid, is missing in almost all major journalistic institutions, certainly in the English-speaking world. So, let's go. May the force be with us. I demonetize all of my reaction videos, but that still doesn't guarantee that you get away with showing snippets from big media companies. So hopefully we're going to be fine.
The cities have been emptied out and demolished. The country
That's
has
Kristen
been
Welcome
demolished.
interviewing Trump.
If I won that election, which
for NBC.
You know how I feel about it, I won't get into it because we don't need to start that argument. I think it's an easy argument. It was really proven even more conclusively by the win that I had on this one. But
you did
had
court,
I,
sir.
well, that's your opinion, but I disagree with it.
Now, what does she say?
But you did
had
court,
I,
sir.
So let's assume she says, but you didn't win it, sir.
Well, that's your opinion, but I disagree with it. Had I kept control, number one, Israel wouldn't have happened. Number two, Ukraine would have never happened. It would have never happened, Ukraine, Russia.
Okay, so that doesn't work, right? What we've just seen there simply doesn't work. So what is the problem and can we solve it? So a bit of empathy, right? When that happens, Kristen is okay because she's very experienced, but it does a tiny bit feel like crap. It does a tiny bit feel like a shower of crap has been poured over you and you can't really do anything about it. You can't press a button to stop it. And when you say, but you didn't, sir, it actually doesn't work. If anything, it just looks like a kind of a token gesture that's immediately undermined by Trump, and then the interview goes on. So that kind of reaction by Kristen, and it's not her fault, and we'll get to why it's not her fault, undermines the very practice of journalism, right, as an institution. So this is a problem. So how do we deal with it? Well, let's ground ourselves first of all a little bit. And you might be frustrated with that, but I always like you to take off your coat and to maybe take off your shoes before you come into the room, because we want to go a bit more slowly here. Let's put aside all of our worries about mainstream journalistic institutions being out of touch, because we are not talking about that now. And yes, you have a good point there. We are in a crisis where alternative media is irresponsibly drifting into total sort of algorithmic calamity, algorithmically driven solipsism and self-deception. But then you have mainstream media that is out of touch in terms of a kind of bizarre privilege it still gives a la 1990s for quasi-neoliberal technocratic centrism, right? So we're not going to just legislate on these discussions. We'll just assume that we're looking at a hypothetical news organization that's interviewing Trump and how they should handle this. Now, why do we empathize with what Kristen is doing there? Because if she doesn't challenge him at all, that's bad. If she challenges him more than she challenged him, what you get is a problem that basically might ruin the whole interview, because you might get stuck on it and he's not going to make the important point that the president of the United States to be um, needs to make about Ukraine. Not that he has a point to make about Ukraine at this stage. He doesn't know what his point is, but that's not the point. The point is he's got to make his point. So what do? It's like a lose-lose situation. So here is my solution in several steps. On this particular occasion, you let him go. You don't challenge him on the spot because he's arriving at a substantive point. This is just an aside. He's arriving at a substantive point. Let him make that point. Number one. Number two, but you can't let it go. You have to call out his lie, his untruth. So what do? If I'm Kristen, at the end of the interview, I say, Trump's claim that he won in 2020 is not based in fact. That's a much more formidable way of challenging him and proactively responding to this difficult dynamic than on the spot saying, but, and then getting trampled over. So you wait till the end. At the end, you do a 12-second line about it. But it can't just be that. Because I don't want Kristen to just do this. I want the institution to lay the foundations for her and anybody else in her place to do this, right? So she shouldn't be alone. There should be an institutional policy about how you calibrate responses, not just to post-truths and untruths and lies in general, but to particular lies. So what we're talking about actually is an institution having a policy on post-truth politics. At the moment, that doesn't exist. Institutions just leave their journalists alone on this, and the results are absurd because you have highly experienced, formidable people like Kristen not having a clue about how to cope with this. So you need an institutional policy. NBC needs that policy. BBC needs that policy. And that policy should guide and also reassure the individual journalist here, because you don't want to be an individual journalist who risks, right, Trump stopping giving interviews to you. Because if Trump's going to stop giving interviews to your organization, you could be open to that, but you need that to happen for the right reason, not because of something you did in an improvised moment. So you need that policy, and that policy should get granular enough down to particular lies. How do we as an organization deal with Trump's election lie? When do we challenge it on the spot? When do we not? When do we say something at the end? Do we say it at the end with Trump or without Trump? So on this occasion, if I'm Kristen and NBC, I say it at the end without Trump, because this is quite a straightforward matter of fact. It's straightforward enough. So Trump does not need a right of reply. You don't need to say that he's lying, but you need to say that what is said isn't based in a matter of fact, as we usually say when Trump repeats this statement. That's all you need. But even that response, which is a considerable improvement on what Kristen has done, has its problems. And let me just make one more point, actually. And that's that if there is a new lie, it's better to challenge it as it comes up. It can be really difficult for a journalist because you need to be very grounded and experienced and factually alert to challenge it. But it's better to challenge a new lie on the spot, even if it begins to derail the interview a bit. But if it's a repeated lie, you have to have this, I prepared this earlier, and then you do it at the end, and you do it without him, I would recommend, on the election untruth. But let's look at what's problematic with what I've suggested. And that's that the judgment I'm inviting NBC to take here, editorial judgment on how to deal with this particular untruth, is not just about stating a clear matter of fact. And there is a clear matter of fact about the election in 2020. But it's more than that, because Trump makes lots of lies. How do you prioritize which ones are important? You can't just do a segment at the end about all the lies he's made. So what do? Well, you prioritize them, but sometimes you have to do that according to principles. And here the principle will be the ritual and process of democratic checks and balances. Anybody who challenges that has to be called out. So lies about that topic are particularly worth, recalcitrantly and repeatedly and in an institutionally formalized way calling out. But that's not itself a matter of fact. That's an evaluative judgment that you've made about what democracy is, which is controversial, and how you would protect democracy. And so that policy risks some polarization. But in the end, you have to stick to it, and you have to say, well, you, Mr. Trump, can propose whatever the hell you want, but we are not going to compromise when what you're proposing is that we shouldn't take election results seriously. If you're proposing that, we're going to challenge it, and we're going to make our response to it formal and central, significant, not just because we're right in the matter of fact and you're wrong, but because this is an area about which the matter of fact especially matters. So that's tricky, right? So that just shows how difficult the whole enterprise of fact-checking is. That even if you keep it low, if we keep it down, which we should at the moment, fact-checking is a very bloated enterprise. It actually undermines itself. Fact-checking needs to be very, very minimal. Right? You can't fact-check whether Putin is an imperialist. You can fact-check how many tanks that belong to Russia are on Ukrainian territory, arguably. But even that can be debatable because it requires an evaluative judgment to establish that some territory is actually Ukrainian and not Russian, no matter what the Kremlin claims. So these are difficult waters. But on challenges to sacred democratic institutions, you basically say, we're going to be sticking to the facts. We're going to be sticking to the facts properly here. And last remark, my approach gives a lot of confidence straight away. It gives confidence to the institution. It gives confidence to the individual journalist because it feels, we're doing something. We're actually reacting in a systematic way. If we don't like our response, we can calibrate it a bit, but we're reacting. At the moment, the response of almost all journalistic institutions to post-truth deception is just floating. You just float. And that kind of bumbling, but you didn't, sir, from a formidable experienced journalist is a really good illustration of how much institutions are bumbling journalistic institutions are bumbling the post-truth era, and we're here to help them stop it. Lots of love.